The night sparkled with Manhattan's dazzling lights. The event hall, perched atop one of the city's most luxurious buildings, was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high-ceiling tables were adorned with exotic floral arrangements, and champagne glasses gleamed under the golden light. New York's elite was in attendance, dressed in their finest attire, ready to celebrate the engagement of the year. Alexander Carter, heir to the vast Carter Enterprises empire, moved through the hall like a king in his castle, receiving congratulations and handshakes. He was the epitome of perfection: a tailored black suit, impeccable posture, and a cold gaze that seemed to pierce anyone who dared look at him too long. At 32, Alexander was the definition of success. His name graced business magazines, and his fortune was one of the most talked about in the country. But as he accepted the congratulations with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his mind was working tirelessly. His engagement to Victoria Sterling, the daughter of tycoon James Sterling, was a strategic move to solidify a billion-dollar partnership between the families. The problem: he despised Victoria. Victoria was everything he loathed in a person: arrogant, spoiled, and obsessed with status. Her smile was as fake as the applause of the guests when the engagement was announced to her. Alexander wasn't a man, he was a trophy, an acquisition to boost her social standing. "Alexander, darling, you're so quiet," Victoria whispered as she approached him with a cynical smile. She held her champagne glass with the trained elegance of someone who lived to impress. "Don't bore our guests, I'm just savoring the moment," he replied, his tone as sharp as the crystal she held. As Victoria moved away to show off her diamond-encrusted engagement ring, Alexander sipped his whiskey, gazing at the city skyline. He needed an escape. This marriage was a sacrifice he wasn't willing to make, and with every second the pressure on him mounted. That's when he saw her across the hall. Emma Miller was carrying a tray of champagne glasses. Her light brown hair was tied back in a simple bun, and the black and white uniform she wore seemed insignificant compared to the gala dresses around her. Yet there was something about her that caught his attention. Her posture was firm, her eyes attentive, and her movements precise. She seemed out of place in that world of ostentation, yet her expression exuded a calmness that contrasted with the chaos around her. Emma was the gardener's daughter, working temporarily at the Carter estate to support her family. When her father fell ill, she took on extra jobs to keep things afloat, splitting her time between college and work. Alexander observed her for a moment, an audacious idea forming in his mind. Perhaps Emma was the key to escaping his engagement to Victoria. Her simplicity and authenticity were everything that was missing in his world of appearances. But how could he convince someone like Emma to participate in such an insane plan? He didn't waste time. Leaving his glass on the counter, Alexander strode toward the makeshift kitchen where Emma was arranging trays. The sound of his firm steps caught her attention, and she looked up, surprised to see the most important man at the event standing in front of her. "Mr. Carter," she said quickly, setting the tray down on the counter. "Do you need something?" Alexander stared at her with an intense look, as if analyzing every detail of her. "Yes, Emma, I need your help." The way he said it made her frown. "My help with what exactly?" He leaned in, slightly reducing the distance between them. "I need you to marry me." Emma blinked, shocked. I need a wife," Alexander explained, his tone as pragmatic as someone closing a deal. "But not just any wife. I need someone to help me stop a marriage that's about to ruin my life." She stepped back, trying to process his words. "This is a joke, right?" "No, I'm serious." Alexander crossed his arms, making it clear he wasn't in the mood to negotiate. "You'd marry me temporarily. In return, I'd ensure your family never has to worry about money again. I'd pay off all your debts, cover your father's treatment, and give you enough money to change your life forever." Emma stared at him, incredulous. "You can't be serious. This is absurd." "It might seem absurd, but it's a good deal," he retorted. "You have nothing to lose, and for me it's the only way out." Emma's heart raced. She knew Alexander Carter was a powerful man, but she had no idea he would be capable of something so far-fetched. Yet his words echoed in her mind. "I'd cover your father's treatment." Her father, who had been on a waiting list for an expensive procedure they couldn't afford for months. "Why me?" she asked, trying to find some logic in his proposal. Alexander shrugged. "Because you're the opposite of Victoria, and at the same time someone I can trust to keep this a secret." Emma bit her lip, feeling cornered. Accepting his proposal meant getting involved in something far bigger than herself, but refusing meant giving up the chance to save her family. "Think about it," Alexander said before. Walking away, you have until tomorrow. Emma stood there alone, trying to process what had just happened. From an invisible waitress to the centerpiece of a game she didn't fully understand, her life had just taken a turn she could never have predicted. Meanwhile, across the hall, Alexander returned to his position with a cold smile on his face. He knew he had planted the seed, and now it was only a matter of time before Emma said yes. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the small Miller household, casting a golden hue over the modest furniture. Emma sat at the worn kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The events of the previous night played in her mind like a broken record. Alexander Carter's words echoed with unsettling clarity. "I need you to marry me." It was preposterous, unbelievable, yet as much as she wanted to dismiss the idea entirely, the promise of financial security and the guarantee of her father's medical treatment pulled at her resolve. Her father's frail voice interrupted her thoughts. "Emma, sweetheart, are you all right? You've been staring at that coffee for ages." She turned to see her father leaning on the door frame, his face pale and thin from months of battling illness. Guilt twisted in her chest. She forced a smile. "I'm fine, Dad. Just thinking." He shuffled toward the table sitting across from her. "You've been working too hard. I don't want you wearing yourself out because of me." Emma reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "Don't worry about me. I'll figure everything out." Her father smiled weakly, but the worry in his eyes remained as he rose to go back to his room. Emma's resolve solidified. If there was even a sliver of truth to Alexander's offer, she had to at least hear him out. Later that day, Emma found herself standing outside the towering Carter Enterprises building, its sleek mirrored exterior intimidating. Her heart pounded in her chest as she entered the lobby, a bustling hub of suits and business deals. The receptionist, a polished woman with sharp features, raised an eyebrow as Emma approached. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Alexander Carter," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman's skepticism was palpable. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not exactly, but he's expecting me," Emma replied, unsure if that was even true. After a quick phone call, the receptionist motioned for Emma to wait. Minutes later, a sharply dressed assistant arrived to escort her to Alexander's office. The elevator ride was silent and tense, and when the doors opened to the top floor, Emma's nerves nearly got the better of her. Alexander's office was everything she expected: vast, minimalist, and expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, and a massive desk dominated the room. Behind it, Alexander stood, his commanding presence filling the space. He turned as she entered, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Miss Miller, I wasn't sure you'd come." Emma crossed her arms, forcing herself to meet his piercing gaze. "I haven't agreed to anything yet. I came to hear more about this arrangement." "Fair enough," Alexander said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "Take a seat." Emma hesitated before sitting, her posture tense. Alexander sat across from her, leaning back in his chair as if he had all the time in the world. "This is a simple business deal," he began, his tone as cold and calculated as ever. "You marry me. In return, I'll pay for your father's treatment, cover your family's debts, and provide you with financial stability." "For how long?" Emma asked, her voice firm. 6 months, Alexander replied without missing a beat. "Long enough to convince everyone that the marriage is real and to dissolve my engagement to Victoria Sterling. And after 6 months, we'll divorce. You'll walk away with everything I've promised, and I'll walk away with my freedom." Emma's stomach churned. "Do you even care about the fallout? People will talk. Your reputation." "My reputation is irrelevant," Alexander interrupted. "People talk regardless of what I do. What matters is that I avoid a marriage that would ruin my life." Emma stared at him, searching for any hint of emotion in his stoic expression. "Why me? Out of all the people you could have chosen, why pick someone like me?" Alexander's gaze softened just barely. "Because you're untainted by this world, you're honest, grounded, and you have something the rest of these people don't: integrity. That's what makes you perfect for this." His words caught her off guard. For a moment she thought she saw a flicker of sincerity in his eyes, but she quickly dismissed it. This was a business transaction to him, nothing more. "And what happens if I say no?" she asked, testing his reaction. Alexander leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "If you say no, I'll find another way. But let me be clear, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you. I'm offering a solution to your problems, not just a favor." Emma's hands clenched into fists in her lap. She hated how logical he made it sound, as if she didn't have a choice. But the reality was she didn't. Her father's life depended on her making the right decision. "I need time to think," she said, finally standing up. Alexander nodded, rising from his chair. "As well, you have until tomorrow. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't wait." That night, Emma lay awake in her small bedroom, The weight of the decision pressing down on her, she thought of her father, of the bills piling up on the kitchen counter, and of the chance to finally lift her family out of their struggles. But she also thought of Alexander, his arrogance, his cold demeanor, and the way he seemed to view her as nothing more than a pawn in his game. Could she really trust him? And more importantly, could she live with herself? If she went through this by the time the first rays of dawn crept through her window, Emma had made her decision the next morning. Emma stood outside the Carter mansion, her heart pounding as she stared up at the massive estate. The decision she had made weighed heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't a choice she had wanted to make, but it felt like the only one she could. Her father's life and her family's future depended on it. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. Within moments, the grand oak doors opened, revealing a butler who looked at her with polite detachment. "Miss Miller, Mr. Carter is expecting you," he said, stepping aside to let her in. The inside of the mansion was just as overwhelming as she remembered: marble floors, grand staircases, and walls adorned with priceless art. Emma felt out of place, her modest clothes contrasting sharply with the lavish surroundings. Alexander was waiting for her in the library, a room that em of leather and old books. He stood by the window, looking out over the perfectly manicured gardens. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable, though there was a flicker of something approval perhaps in his eyes. "You came," he said simply. Emma nodded, her throat dry. "I've made my decision, and I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But I have conditions." Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Conditions?" "Yes," Emma said, lifting her chin. "This may be a business arrangement for you, but it's my life. I won't let you treat me like an employee or an accessory." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Alexander's lips. "Fair enough. What are your terms?" "First, I want everything in writing, a contract that outlines exactly what you're offering and what you expect from me," she said, her tone firm. "Second, my family's privacy is non-negotiable. No one is to involve them or draw attention to them because of this arrangement." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Reasonable. Anything else?" Emma hesitated, then added, "And I want your word that when this is over you'll leave me alone. No strings, no lingering obligations." For the first time, Alexander's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "You'll have your freedom when this is over. I can promise you that." Emma exhaled, relieved. "Then we have a deal." Alexander extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Emma shook it. His grip was firm and warm, and for a moment she felt a strange sense of finality. This was it. She was stepping into a world she barely understood, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Alexander moved with the efficiency of a man used to getting what he wanted. His lawyers drafted the contract, ensuring every detail was covered. Emma spent hours going over the documents, determined not to miss anything that could put her or her family at risk. As the wedding date approached, the media frenzy began. News of Alexander's sudden engagement to a mystery woman spread like wildfire, leaving everyone speculating about the identity of his bride. Victoria Sterling, furious at being blindsided, made her feelings known publicly, fueling rumors and gossip. Despite the chaos, Alexander remained calm, as though orchestrating a carefully planned chess game. Emma, on the other hand, felt like a pawn being moved across the board. Each step of the process reminded her of just how different their worlds were. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Emma found herself standing in a small room at City Hall, dressed in a simple ivory dress Alexander had arranged for her. It was nothing like the lavish ceremonies she had imagined as a little girl. There were no flowers, no music, no family or friends, just a cold transactional air that made her chest tighten. When Alexander entered the room, in a perfectly tailored suit, she barely recognized him. His usual arrogance seemed subdued, replaced by a quiet determination. He walked up to her, his eyes scanning her face as though trying to read her thoughts. "Are you ready?" he asked. Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Let's get this over with." The ceremony was quick and formal, presided over by a judge who seemed indifferent to the significance of the moment. When it came time to exchange vows, struggled to repeat the words, her voice trembling. Alexander, by contrast, spoke with cool precision, as though closing a business deal. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Emma felt a strange mix of relief and unease. This was supposed to be the start of a new chapter in her life, but it felt more like stepping into uncharted territory. Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said quietly. "From this moment on, you're Mrs. Carter." Emma forced a small smile, though the title felt foreign on her tongue. "I guess we should celebrate." His lips curved into a faint smirk. "That won't be necessary. The press will have their story and will maintain Appearances beyond that, there's no need for unnecessary theatrics. As they left City Hall, the flash of cameras greeted them, reporters shouting questions about their whirlwind romance. Alexander slipped an arm around Emma's waist, pulling her close for the photographers. The gesture felt calculated, but the warmth of his touch sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. That evening Emma found herself alone in one of the Carter mansion's guest rooms. The quiet was overwhelming, and the weight of what she had done pressed down on her. She had married a man she barely knew, one whose intentions were as cold as the marble floors beneath her feet. But as she looked out the window at the sprawling gardens below, she reminded herself why she had agreed to this. Her father's treatment was now guaranteed, and her family's struggles were over, or now she had made her choice, and there was no turning back. In the distance, Alexander stood on the balcony of his room, a glass of whiskey in hand. He gazed out at the city skyline, his expression unreadable. For him, this was a victory, a step toward reclaiming his freedom. But even he couldn't ignore the strange nagging feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. The days following the wedding passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated public appearances. Alexander and Emma were thrust into a world of relentless media scrutiny, their every move dissected and analyzed. Photographs of the happy couple adorned gossip columns, painting a picture of romance and passion that couldn't have been further from the truth. For Emma, life in the Carter mansion was a constant reminder of how out of place she felt. The sprawling estate was cold and impersonal, with its marble floors and gilded decor. It wasn't home, it was a fortress, and Alexander was its impenetrable ruler. One morning Emma wandered through the mansion's vast garden, seeking solace among the perfectly manicured hedges and vibrant blooms. She found a bench beneath an ancient oak tree and sat down, letting out a heavy sigh. The weight of her new life was becoming unbearable. She missed her modest home, her father's laughter, and the simplicity of her old routine. Her solitude was interrupted by the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel path. She looked up to see Alexander approaching, his expression unreadable. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and carried a cup of coffee in one hand. "I didn't expect to find you out here," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. Emma shrugged. "I needed some air." Alexander sat down beside her, the space between them a chasm filled with unspoken tension. He placed the coffee on the bench's armrest, leaning back slightly as he regarded her with those piercing blue eyes. "You've been quiet," he observed. Emma glanced at him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What did you expect, Alexander? I'm living in a house that doesn't feel like mine, pretending to be something I'm not. It's exhausting." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might lash out, but instead he surprised her. "I know this isn't easy for you," he admitted, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it, "but you agreed to this." "We both did." Emma shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh. "I didn't agree to be paraded around like a trophy." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you think this is, a parade? What else would you call it?" she shot back. "Every time we step outside, it's all fake smiles and rehearsed gestures. It's not real." For a moment silence stretched between them, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he said finally. "It's not real, but it's necessary." Emma turned to him, surprised by his admission. "Necessary for who? Your business." "For both of us," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "You may not see it now, but this arrangement benefits you as much as it does me." Emma stood up abruptly, unable to contain her frustration. "You keep saying that, but you don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've given up for this." Alexander rose as well, towering over her. "I know more than you think, Emma, and I know that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we care about." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emma stared at him, searching for a trace of vulnerability in his otherwise stoic demeanor. For the first time she saw a flicker of something human in his eyes, regret perhaps, or guilt, but just as quickly as it appeared it was gone. Alexander stepped back, his walls firmly in place once more. "Don't forget why you're here," he said, his voice colder now. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Emma watched him walk away, her emotions a tangled mess. She hated how he could switch between moments of warmth and icy detachment so effortlessly it made it impossible to know where she stood with him. That evening a formal dinner was scheduled at the mansion, attended by some of Alexander's closest business associates. Emma spent the afternoon preparing herself with the help of a stylist. Alexander had hired. The dress she wore was elegant, but understated, a deep emerald green that complemented her fair complexion. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back when she entered the dining room. The guests turned to look at her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and admiration. Alexander stood at the head of the table, his gaze locking onto hers. As she approached, he extended his hand, and she hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. "You look stunning," he said quietly, his tone devoid of sarcasm. "For once, thank you," she replied, forcing a small smile. Throughout the dinner, Emma played her role flawlessly, smiling and engaging in polite conversation. She could feel Alexander's eyes on her from time to time, and she wondered if he was silently evaluating her performance. After the last course was served, Alexander stood to make a toast. He raised his glass, his voice commanding the attention of the room. "To new beginnings," he said, glancing briefly at Emma before continuing, "and to partnerships that defy expectations." The guests applauded, and Emma forced herself to smile. But beneath the surface, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used as a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. Later that night, as Emma retreated to her room, she found herself thinking about Alexander's early words in the garden. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we care about." Could there be more to him than the cold, calculating businessman he appeared to be? Or was she simply clinging to the hope that this arrangement might be something more than a transaction? As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thing was certain: the fragile truce between them wouldn't last forever. The days turned into weeks, and Emma slowly adjusted to her new life and the Carter mansion. The press had quieted somewhat after the initial media frenzy, but the scrutiny never completely disappeared. Every public appearance with Alexander was an exercise in perfection, smiles that didn't reach their eyes, rehearsed gestures of affection and carefully chosen words. But behind the mansion's grand facade, the cracks in their arrangement were beginning to show. It was a rainy afternoon when Emma found herself in the kitchen, a rare moment of solitude. She had learned quickly that the staff treated her with a mix of deference and curiosity. Unsure whether to see her as a member of the household or an outsider, she often avoided them, retreating to quieter corners of the mansion. As she brewed herself a cup of tea, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. She looked up to see Alexander entering, his usually pristine suit slightly disheveled, his tie hung loose, and his expression was darker than usual. "Rough day?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Alexander paused, seeming caught off guard by her presence. "Something like that." Emma gestured to the kettle tea. He hesitated before nodding. "Sure." She poured him a cup, sliding it across the counter. Alexander accepted it, leaning against the marble island. For a moment neither of them spoke, the only sound the rain tapping against the windows. "What happened?" Emma asked, finally breaking the silence. Alexander took a sip of tea, his gaze distant. "A deal fell through." "It happens." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Does it? You don't strike me as the type to let deals slip away." A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "You're observant." "I spend a lot of time watching," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "It's hard not to in a house like this." Alexander set his cup down, studying her. "What do you see when you watch?" Emma hesitated, unsure if she should answer, but something about the quiet moment between them felt safe. "I see a man who has everything but doesn't seem happy." His expression hardened, the brief vulnerability disappearing. "Happiness is overrated." Emma frowned, stepping closer. "Is that what you really believe, or is that just easier to say?" Alexander's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she thought he might say something meaningful. But instead, he straightened his mask firmly back in place. "Thanks for the tea," he said curtly before turning and leaving the room. Emma watched him go, frustration and curiosity swirling inside her every time she thought she was beginning to understand him. He shut her out again. That evening, Emma wandered into the library, hoping to lose herself in a book. She was scanning the shelves when a familiar voice broke the silence. Looking for something specific, she turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He seemed more relaxed than usual, though his sharp gaze hadn't softened. "Just something to pass the time," Emma replied, turning back to the shelves. "This house feels like a museum sometimes." Alexander stepped into the room, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. "You get used to it." Emma pulled a book from the shelf and sat across from him, opening it to the first page. She could feel his eyes on her, and it made focusing on the words impossible. "Do you miss your old life?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Every day." "Why?" he pressed. Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because it was real. My father, our little house, my routine wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Here, everything feels borrowed." Alexander studied her for a moment before noting. "I know the feeling." "You?" Emma asked, genuinely surprised. "How could you possibly feel like that? This is all yours." Alexander swirled the whiskey In his glass, a distant look in his eyes. Is it, or is it just something I inherited, something I have to maintain because that's what's expected of me? Emma didn't know how to respond. For the first time, she saw the weight Alexander carried, the pressure of living up to a legacy, the constant expectations, and the isolation that came with it. You could walk away, she said softly. He let out a humorless laugh. And go where this is all I've ever known. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For the first time, Emma felt like she was seeing a glimpse of the man behind the mask. The next morning, Emma woke to find a bouquet of fresh flowers on the small table in her room. A simple card was tucked inside, bearing a single line in Alexander's handwriting. Thank you for last night. She stared at the note, her heart pounding. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant for all his arrogance and detachment. Alexander had moments of unexpected kindness, moments that made her wonder if there was more to him than she had thought. But just as quickly as the thought came, she pushed it away. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She couldn't afford to let herself think otherwise. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile balance between Emma and Alexander became a delicate dance of unspoken truths and guarded emotions. Publicly, they played their roles to perfection. He the confident and successful businessman, she the supportive and graceful wife. But behind closed doors, the lines between their staged marriage and reality began to blur. One evening, a charity gala brought them back into the spotlight. The ballroom was a dazzling affair with glittering chandeliers, a live orchestra, and New York's elite dressed in their finest. Emma felt like an imposter among them, her emerald gown a carefully chosen symbol of elegance, courtesy of Alexander's stylist. As they entered the room, Alexander's hand rested lightly on her lower back, a gesture that looked affectionate to the crowd but felt rehearsed to Emma. The cameras flashed, capturing their arrival as the perfect couple. Emma smiled through the discomfort, knowing this was part of the deal. Throughout the evening, Emma played her part, mingling with the guests and answering polite questions about her life, but her patience wore thin when she overheard a group of women whispering behind her back, "She's pretty, but you can tell she doesn't belong." One woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. Emma's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain composed. She'd endured far worse in her life and refused to let their words get to her. Alexander, ever observant, appeared at her side moments later. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. Emma nodded, plastering on a smile. "Perfectly fine." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he took her hand and led her onto the dance floor. The ORCH was playing a slow waltz, and the sudden attention made Emma's heart race. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "Proving them wrong," Alexander said simply, his hand resting on her waist. As they began to dance, Emma was surprised by his ease on the dance floor, his movements smooth and confident. She stumbled at first, unaccustomed to the intimacy of the moment, but he guided her effortlessly. "Relax," he murmured, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "Let them see what they want to see." Emma met his gaze, her breath catching at the intensity in his eyes. For a fleeting moment, it didn't feel like an act, it felt real, and that terrified her. After the gala, the ride back to the mansion was unusually quiet. Alexander sat beside her in the back seat, his focus on the city lights flashing by the car window. Emma, still reeling from the dance, stole glances at him, wondering if he felt the same. Inexplicable. When they arrived home, Emma started to retreat to her room, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Emma," he called, his tone softer than usual. She turned, her heart pounding. "Yes, thank you," he said, the words catching her off guard. "For tonight." Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I was just doing my part." Alexander's lips quirked into a faint smile. "You did more than that. You handled yourself well." She nodded, unsure of what to say. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night," he replied, watching her as she disappeared down the hallway. The next morning, Emma found herself restless. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind, and she decided to distract herself by exploring more of the mansion's sprawling grounds. She wandered through the gardens, eventually finding her way to the greenhouse, a structure she hadn't noticed before. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Rows of vibrant plants lined the space, and in the center stood a grand piano, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. Curiosity got the better of her. Emma approached the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. She hadn't played in years, but the muscle memory came flooding back as she tentatively pressed a few notes. The sound filled the greenhouse, soft and haunting. Emma closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the music. For a brief moment, she felt like herself again, free from the weight of her new life. She didn't notice Alexander standing in the doorway until he spoke. "I Didn't know you play. Emma's fingers froze on the keys. She turned to see him watching her, his expression unreadable. I used to, she said, her voice quiet. It's been a long time. You're good, he said, stepping further into the room. Why did you stop? Emma hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share something so personal, but there was something about the way he looked at her, curious but not judgmental, that made her feel safe. Life got in the way, she admitted. There wasn't much time for music when my family needed me. Alexander nodded, his gaze thoughtful. You should play more, it suits you. Emma looked down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. Maybe. For a moment neither of them spoke, the air between them charged with an unspoken connection. Then Alexander broke the silence. I should go, he said, his tone almost reluctant. But don't stop playing, turned and left, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She stared after him, her heart a mix of confusion and something she couldn't quite name. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about Alexander's words. There was a side to him she hadn't expected, a side that cared even if he didn't want to admit it. And as much as she tried to remind herself that this was just a business arrangement, she couldn't ignore the growing bond between them. But was it real, or just another illusion? In the game they were playing, the tension between Emma and Alexander grew more complex. With each passing day, their relationship existed in an ambiguous space, neither entirely business-like nor fully personal. Both of them felt the growing weight of unspoken words and unacknowledged emotions, but neither dared to cross the fragile boundary they had built. One evening, Emma was in the study poring over a stack of books she had borrowed from the mansion's vast library. The quiet of the room was a rare reprieve from the structured chaos of her new life. She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice Alexander's arrival until he cleared his throat, studying something important, he asked, leaning against the doorway with his usual air of casual confidence. Emma glanced up, startled. Not exactly, just trying to distract myself. Alexander stepped inside, his gaze scanning the titles spread across the table. Classics. Didn't peg you for a Hemingway fan? Emma shrugged, setting her book aside. I used to read a lot when I was younger. It helped me escape reality for a while. He sat across from her, his expression softening. What are you escaping now? The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure how much she wanted to reveal. This arrangement, it feels like I'm living someone else's life most of the time. Alexander's eyes met hers, and for a moment his mask slipped. You're not the only one who feels that way. Emma tilted her head, studying him. Really? Because you seem perfectly at ease in this world. He let out a humorless laugh. That's because I've had years to perfect the ACT. But don't mistake comfort for happiness. There it was again, that glimpse of vulnerability that made Emma question everything she thought she knew about him. She wanted to push further to understand the man behind the facade, but Alexander quickly changed the subject. You've been doing well, he said, his tone returning to its usual controlled neutrality. Everyone's convinced this marriage is real. Emma frowned, feeling a pang of frustration. Is that all you care about, convincing everyone? Alexander's gaze hardened slightly. It's what we agreed on, isn't it? She sighed, leaning back in her chair. You're impossible, you know that, and yet here you are, he replied with a faint smirk. Emma shook her head, unwilling to let him win this round. Do you ever let anyone in? Alexander, or is this, she gestured between them, as close as you get for a moment? He said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, almost too softly to hear, he replied, maybe. I don't know how. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma stared at him, unsure how to respond. But before she could say anything, Alexander stood, his walls firmly back in place. Good night, Emma, he said, his voice distant. Good night, she whispered as he left the room. The next day, Emma decided she needed to clear her head. She ventured into the city, eager to escape the suffocating grandeur of the mansion. She wandered through the bustling streets, blending in with the crowd in a way she hadn't been able to since her marriage to Alexander. As she browsed the shelves of a quaint bookstore, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen to see Alexander's name, his message brief and to the point. Where are you? Rolling her eye, she typed a quick response out. I needed some space. Seconds later, her phone rang. She sighed, answering reluctantly. Yes, Alexander, you should have told me you were leaving, he said, his tone firm. I'm not a prisoner, Emma replied, irritation creeping into her voice. No, but you're my wife. People will notice if you disappear. Emma's grip on the phone tightened. I didn't realize I needed permission to go outside. There was a pause, and when Alexander spoke again, his voice was quieter. Just be careful. The unexpected concern in his words caught her off guard. I'll be fine. I'll be back later, Emma, he said, his tone almost hesitant. Thank you for what? For not running. The line went dead before she could respond, leaving her Staring at the phone in disbelief, what did he meant by that? Did he really think she was capable of abandoning their arrangement that evening? When Emma returned to the mansion, Alexander was waiting for her in the sitting room. He didn't say anything as she entered, simply in for her to sit. She hesitated before taking the seat across from him. "I didn't mean to upset you earlier," he said after a long silence, "but this situation is delicate. Any misstep could undo everything." Emma sighed, her frustration melting into exhaustion. "I know it's just hard pretending all the time." Alexander nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You're not pretending as much as you think." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You're more real in this world than anyone else I've met. That's why I chose you." Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words, but she quickly dismissed the feeling. This was still a transaction, no matter how complicated their dynamic had become. "Alexander," she began, her voice steady, "what happens when this is over?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his response. "We go back to our lives. Isn't that what you want?" Emma hesitated, the question stirring something deep within her. Was it what she wanted, or had things already changed too much? "I guess we'll see," she said. Finally, her voice quiet. That night, as Emma lay awake in bed, she replayed their conversation in her mind. For all of Alexander's coldness and control, there were moments when he let his guard down, moments that made her question whether this arrangement was as simple as they had agreed, and for the first time she wondered if walking away at the end would truly be as easy as she had thought. The Carter mansion was quiet as the early morning sunlight streamed through the large windows. Emma, seated at the dining table with a steaming cup of coffee, flipped absent-mindedly through a newspaper. The headlines screamed about politics and scandals, but one article caught her attention. "Alexander Carter, the man behind the empire." The piece was glowing, detailing Alexander's business acumen and ruthless ambition. It described him as unshakable, untouchable, a man who could bend the world to his will. Emma smirked bitterly. The public had no idea what Alexander was really like, the man behind the mask who was both infuriatingly cold and unexpectedly vulnerable. Her thoughts were interrupted when the man himself walked into the room, already dressed in a suit, his expression unreadable as always. "Good morning," he said, his voice crisp. "Morning," Emma replied, setting the newspaper aside. Alexander's eyes flicked to the headline that had caught her attention. "Reading about me?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "It's hard not to when your name is everywhere." He poured himself a cup of coffee, taking a seat across from her. "What do you think about what the article? Is it accurate?" Emma studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "It paints you as invincible, but you're not." Alexander's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone likes to believe in myths." Emma leaned forward slightly. "Why do you let them? Why not show people who you really are?" His gaze darkened. "Because the real me wouldn't impress anyone." Emma frowned. "You think so little of yourself." Alexander didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "People see what they want to see. It's easier that way." Emma wanted to press him further, but the moment passed as quickly as it had come. Alexander straightened his professional mask firmly back in place. "I have meetings all day. Don't let the house swallow you whole." And with that he left, leaving Emma with more questions than answers. Later that afternoon, Emma decided to visit the greenhouse again. The warmth and vibrant colors of the plants made her feel alive in a way the rest of the mansion didn't. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, debating whether to play. Before she could decide, the door opened, and Victoria Sterling walked in, her heels clicking against the stone floor. Emma froze. Victoria had always been a looming shadow in her life since the day this arrangement began, a reminder of the strings attached to her marriage. Today, she looked as polished as ever, her tailored dress and designer bag exuding wealth and confidence. "Well, if it isn't the mystery bride," Victoria said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Emma stood, forcing herself to remain calm. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "I came to speak with Alexander," Victoria replied, her smile sharp. "But it seems he's out, so I thought I'd see what all the fuss is about." Emma crossed her arms, meeting Victoria's gaze. "What do you want?" Victoria took a step closer, her expression turning cold. "You may have fooled the world, but you don't fool me. I know this marriage is a sham." Emma's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Believe whatever you want, Victoria. It doesn't change anything." "Oh, it changes everything," Victoria said, voice low, "because when the truth comes out, and it always does, you'll be the one left to pick up the pieces." Emma didn't respond. She refused to let Victoria see the doubt creeping into her mind. After a tense silence, Victoria turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. That evening, Emma waited for Alexander to return. When he finally arrived. His tie loosened and his expression weary. She wasted no time. Victoria came to see you today. She said, her tone clipped. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Did she? Yes, she also made it very clear that she knows this marriage isn't real. Alexander sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Victoria's always been perceptive, but she can't prove anything. Emma folded her arms, frustration bubbling to the surface. How can you be so calm about this? Check a threat, Alexander. She's nothing more than a spoiled child throwing a tantrum, he replied, his voice dismissive. Emma stepped closer, her voice rising slightly. This isn't just about you. If she exposes us, it'll affect my family too. Alexander's eyes softened at her words. For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to say something reassuring, but his usual stoicism won out. I'll handle Victoria. And what if you can't? Emma pressed. I will, he said firmly, his gaze locking onto hers. You just have to trust me. Emma stared at him, torn between frustration and an inexplicable urge to believe him. Finally she nodded, though doubt still lingered in her mind. Later that night, Alexander sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Victoria's visit had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. She was unpredictable and vindictive, and he knew she wouldn't let this go easily. But what troubled him more was Emma, the way she had confronted him, her anger laced with fear, not for herself, but for her family. It had stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite name. He had entered this arrangement expecting detachment and control, but Emma had a way of breaking through his carefully constructed walls, and that terrified him. The tension Victoria's visit left behind lingered in the mansion like an unspoken warning. Emma carried the weight of the confrontation, her mind racing with possibilities. If Victoria truly intended to expose their secret, it wasn't just Alexander's reputation at stake, it was her family's safety, her father's treatment, and everything she'd sacrificed to keep them secure. That morning Emma was in the kitchen when Alexander entered, looking as composed as ever. Despite his polished exterior, she could sense the weariness behind his carefully crafted mask. Good morning, he said, his voice neutral. More, she replied, her tone curt, as she poured herself a cup of tea. Alexander lingered, his gaze flicking to Hiru. Upset? Emma set her cup down with a sharper clink than intended. Upset? No, Alexander, I'm beyond upset. Your ex-fiancé came to our home, practically threatened me, and you expect me to pretend everything's fine? He crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. I told you I'll handle Victoria. You keep saying that, but I don't see any evidence of it. Emma snapped. She's dangerous, and if she exposes us, she won't. Alexander interrupted, his voice firm. Victoria knows how to play games, but I know her weaknesses. She won't risk ruining her own reputation in the process. Emma narrowed her eyes. You're awfully confident for someone standing on such shaky ground. Alexander stepped closer, his presence imposing, but not threatening. Do you trust me? Emma, the question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, her words caught in her throat. Did she trust him? She wanted to believe he had everything under control, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Alexander's expression softened just a fraction, and he nodded. Fair enough, but I won't let anything happen to you or your family. You have my word. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her with her swirling thoughts and an uneasy feeling in her chest. Later that afternoon, Emma retreated to the greenhouse, seeking solace in the familiar warmth and vibrant greenery. She sat at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys absently. Music had always been her refuge, a way to quiet her mind when everything felt too overwhelming. As she played a soft, melancholic tune, the door opened, and she glanced up to see Alexander standing there. He didn't say anything, simply leaning against the doorway and listening. When she finished, he stepped inside, his gaze thoughtful. You're good, he said, breaking the silence. Emma shrugged, her fingers still resting on the keys. It helps me think. Alexander approached, his movements uncharacteristically hesitant. I've been thinking too. She looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. What about this arrangement? He said, his eyes meeting hers. I've kept things professional because that's what we agreed on, but it's clear that this situation isn't just affecting me, it's affecting you in ways I didn't anticipate. Emma tilted her head, studying him. And what are you saying, Alexander? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm saying that I underestimated you. I didn't think you'd matter as much as you do. The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on Emma's chest. She didn't know how to respond, caught between disbelief and something warmer, something hopeful. Is that supposed to be a compliment? She asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. Alexander's lips twitched into a faint smile. Take it however you want. Before Emma could press him further, his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He pulled it from his pocket, his expression darkening as He read the message. "What is it?" Emma asked, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Victoria," he said grimly, "she's making her move." That evening the mansion was quieter than usual. The tension, almost tangible. Alexander had spent hours in his study taking calls and planning his next move. Emma waited anxiously in the sitting room, the minutes dragging by like hours. When Alexander finally emerged, his expression was a mix of determination and frustration. "She's planning to go public," he said, his voice low, "but I've managed to buy us some time." Emma's heart sank. "How long?" "A few days, maybe a week," he replied, "but it won't last unless we take control of the narrative." "And how do we do that?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Alexander met her gaze, his blue eyes sharp. "We need to make this marriage look real, undeniably real." Emma's stomach churned. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we have to act like a couple in love," he said, his tone firm. "No more rehearsed gestures or polite smiles. If we want to convince the world, we have to convince everyone, including Victoria, that this marriage is genuine." Emma stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're asking me to lie on an even bigger scale." "I'm asking you to protect yourself," Alexander countered, "and your family. This is the only way." Emma closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She hated how logical he made it sound, how impossible it was to argue with him. When she opened her eyes, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But this had better work." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "It will. I'll make sure of it." As the night wore on, Emma found herself sitting on the balcony outside her room, staring at the city lights in the distance. Alexander's words replayed in her mind, his determination to shield her from the fallout, both reassuring and terrifying. She heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her and turned to see Alexander standing there, his tie gone and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked more human in that moment than she'd ever seen him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, leaning against the railing beside her. Emma shook her head. "Too much on my mind." They stood in silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around them. Then softly Alexander said, "I know this isn't easy for you, but I need you to know that I'm not going to let Victoria win." Emma glanced at him, her heart aching with a mix of emotions she couldn't name. "I hope you're right, Alexander, for both our sakes." He turned to look at her, his gaze steady. "I am." The morning after Alexander's bold declaration, Emma awoke with a heavy heart. She had agreed to intensify their arcade, but the idea of pretending to be in love with a man who confused her at every turn felt overwhelming. Yet, as she thought about her father and her family, she reminded herself why she had agreed to this arrangement in the first place. By midday, the plan was in motion. Alexander had arranged for them to attend a high-profile charity auction that evening, a public opportunity to showcase their love and deflect Victoria's threats. Emma spent the afternoon being prepped by Alexander's team, her hair styled in loose waves and her makeup applied to perfection. She wore a deep red gown that hugged her figure elegantly, making her feel both powerful and vulnerable. When Alexander saw her at the bottom of the grand staircase, his usual composure faltered. For a brief moment his eyes lingered, and Emma couldn't ignore the way his expression softened. "You look stunning," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you," Emma replied, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "You don't look so bad yourself." Alexander smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Leighton, give them a show." The charity event was a dazzling affair held in one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels, till chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, and the city's elite mingled over champagne and whispered conversations. Cameras flashed as Alexander and Emma entered arm in arm, their synchronized smiles hiding the tension beneath the surface. Emma felt every pair of eyes on her as they moved through the crowd. Alexander's hand resting lightly on her waist, he guided her with ease, introducing her to business associates and socialites, each interaction carefully choreographed. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple deeply in love, but Emma couldn't ignore the doubt gnawing at her. Was she truly convincing? Did Victoria believe the act? As the night wore on, Alexander led Emma to a small stage in the center of the room. The auctioneer welcomed them warmly, gesturing for Alexander to speak. He took the microphone, his usual confidence amplified by the attention of the room. "Good evening," Alexander began, his deep voice commanding the crowd's focus. "Tonight, we gather not just to bid on luxury, but to support a cause that changes lives. My wife and I are honored to be here and contribute to such an important mission." Emma froze slightly at the bored wife. It sounded so natural when he said it, yet it felt like an illusion. She forced a smile as Alexander turned to her, taking her hand in his, "And speaking of important things," he continued, his eyes locking with hers, "Emma has been my greatest source of inspiration. She reminds me every day what it means to care deeply and give selflessly." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emma barely heard it. The sincerity in Alexander's voice startled her, and for a moment she wondered if he was still acting, or if there was truth hidden in his words. When the speech ended, Alexander led her off the stage, his hands still holding hers. "You did well," he murmured, as they returned to the crowd. "So did you," Emma replied, her voice barely audible. Hours later, back at the mansion, Emma felt the weight of the evening settle over her. She stood in front of the large mirror in her room, pulling pins from her hair and letting it fall loose around her shoulders. The gown still clung to her frame, a reminder of the role she had played so convincingly. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Come in," she called. Alexander stepped inside, his tie loosened and his jacket slammed over one arm. He looked less like the polished billionaire and more like a man worn down by the day. You were incredible tonight," he said, his tone sincere. Emma turned to face him, crossing her arms. "So were you, but you've had years of practice," Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "Not like this tonight. Felt different." Emma frowned, confused. "Different how?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers again. "It didn't feel like a performance, it felt real." The words hit Emma like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless. She searched his face for any sign of deception, but all she saw was honesty. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to find the right response. "Alexander, this is still an arrangement," she said, her voice trembling. "Isn't it?" He stepped closer, his blue eyes piercing. "Is it? Because somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like one to me." Emma's breath caught. The room seemed to shrink as the space between them disappeared. Alexander raised a hand, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you I wouldn't let anything happen to you," he said softly, "and I meant it. But this isn't just about protecting you anymore. I don't know when it happened, but you've become more than just my partner in this." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him, but the walls she had built around her heart were hard to tear down. "Alexander, I don't know if I can." Before she could finish, he leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both hesitant and deeply certain. Emma froze for a moment, her mind screaming at her to pull away, but her heart betrayed her, and she found herself leaning into the kiss, her hands clutching his shirt as if anchoring herself. When they finally pulled apart, the air between them was electric. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have." Emma placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Don't apologize." For the first time since this arrangement began, Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The lines between real and fake had blurred, and she wasn't sure they could ever go back. The morning after the kiss, Emma woke with her thoughts tangled in confusion and doubt. The memory of Alexander's lips on hers lingered, filling her with warmth and unease in equal measure. She had told herself countless times that this marriage was nothing more than an arrangement, a necessary sacrifice for her family's well-being, but last night had shattered that. The kiss had felt real too. Real. Downstairs, the mansion was unusually quiet. Emma found Alexander in his study, seated at his desk, flipping through a stack of documents. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said, his voice even. "Good morning," Emma replied, her tone cautious. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Emma shifted awkwardly, unsure of how to address what had happened the night before. Alexander seemed equally reluctant, his usual confidence replaced with a hint of uncertainty. "I thought we should talk," she began, breaking the silence. Alexander sat down his pen and leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting hers. "About last night?" Emma nodded, her heart pounding. "It can't happen again." His jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. "I understand." Emma felt a pang of guilt at the flicker of hurt in his eyes, but she pushed it aside. "This is complicated enough as it is if we let our emotions get involved." "Who says emotions are involved?" Alexander interrupted, his voice cool. Emma froze, taken aback by a sudden shift in tone. "What do you mean?" Alexander stood, his towering presence filling the room. "You're right, this is an arrangement, and I have no intention of complicating it further." His words stunned more than Emma expected. She nodded stiffly, forcing a smile. "Good, then we're on the same page." But as she left the study, her chest ached with an emotion she couldn't quite name. That evening a storm rolled in, rain hammering against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. Emma sat in the greenhouse, the only place where she felt she could breathe. She stared out at the darkened sky, her mind racing. She heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly damp from the humidity. He looked at her for a long moment before stepping inside. "I thought you might be here," he said, his voice softer than usual. Emma didn't respond, her gaze returning to the storm outside. Alexander walked closer, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. "Emma," he began, his voice hesitant. "About what I said earlier, I didn't mean it. Emma's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. What? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I said it to protect myself, to protect you. But the truth is I don't know how to keep this just an arrangement anymore. Her heart raced as his words sank in. She opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand to stop her. You don't have to say anything, he continued. I just needed to be honest for once. Emma stood, her emotions a whirlwind. Alexander, this isn't fair. You can't just say something like that and expect me to ignore it. I'm not asking you to ignore it, he said, stepping closer. I'm asking you to consider that maybe this isn't just a lie anymore. Emma's breath hitched as he reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. She wanted to pull away to protect herself from the chaos he was creating, but she couldn't. His touch was both terrifying and comforting. Why me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why now? Alexander's eyes softened, the usual hardness replaced with something raw and vulnerable. Because you are the first person who's ever made me feel like I'm more than just Alexander Carter, the businessman. You see me, Emma, and I can't pretend that doesn't matter. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, and she looked away, her mind wearing with her heart. She had spent so long guarding herself, refusing to let anyone in, but Alexander's words, his actions were breaking down her defenses piece by piece. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can trust this. You don't have to decide now, Alexander said gently, but I need you to know that I'm not giving up. Emma looked at him, the sincerity in his eyes shaking her to her core. She nodded slowly, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside her. The storm continued into the night, its intensity mirroring the emotions swirling inside the mansion. Emma lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Alexander, about the way he had looked at her, about the truth in his words. For the first time since this arrangement began, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. But with that came fear. Fear of what it would mean to let him in, to risk everything she had built to protect herself. And yet a small, quiet part of her whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The days following Alexander's confession were a whirlwind of emotions for Emma. Every interaction with him felt charged, each glance and unspoken word holding more meaning than she could process. Despite her hesitation, something deep inside her had shifted. She no longer saw Alexander as just the arrogant businessman who had roped her into a marriage of convenience. He was more than that now, and it terrified her. The morning began with a flurry of activity. Alexander had planned a weekend retreat to one of his family's properties in the Hamptons, an opportunity to strengthen their public image in a less formal setting. Emma reluctantly agreed to join him, knowing that Victoria's threats left them no room for missteps. The drive to the Hamptons was long and quiet. Emma stared out the window, watching the city give way to sprawling countryside, her thoughts swirling. Alexander sat beside her, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his usual composed demeanor betraying a flicker of tension. When they arrived, Emma couldn't help but marvel at the estate. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean. The salty breeze carried the scent of the sea, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore was almost hypnotic. This place is incredible, Emma said softly as they stepped inside. Alexander smiled faintly. It was my mother's favorite. She used to bring me here every summer. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the personal admission. It must hold a lot of memories. It does, he replied, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Some good, some complicated. Emma wanted to ask more, but the vulnerability in his tone stopped her. Instead, she followed him through the house, letting the tranquility of the place wash over her. That evening they hosted a small dinner with a select group of Alexander's business associates. Emma played her role flawlessly, smiling and engaging in conversation, all while feeling Alexander's eyes on her throughout the night. His gaze wasn't the cold, calculating one she had grown used to. It was softer, more contemplative, and it made her heart race. After the guests left, Emma retreated to the balcony overlooking the ocean. The moonlight danced on the waves, casting a silvery glow over the water. She wrapped her arms around herself, lost in thought. You did well tonight. Alexander's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. I'm getting us to the AHCHT, she said with a small, tired smile. He stepped closer, his presence commanding yet comforting. It didn't feel like an act. Emma's breath hitched as he stopped a few feet away, his gaze locking onto hers. You were genuine tonight, Emma. You always are. That's what makes you so different. She looked away, her heart pounding. Alexander, I don't know what you're expecting from me. I'm not expecting anything, he said softly. I just want you to know how much I appreciate you for being here, for putting up with all of this. Emma met his gaze again, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. It's not easy, you know, pretending like this doesn't affect me. I know, he admitted, his voice low. And it's not easy for me either. They stood in silence, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. Then, slowly, Alexander reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Emma, whatever happens, whatever Victoria tries, I promise you, I'll protect you. Emma's chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, but her fear held her back. And who's going to protect you, Alexander? His lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't need protecting. Yes, you do, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've built these walls around yourself, but they won't hold forever. Alexander's expression faltered, his usual confidence giving way to something raw and unguarded. Maybe, he said softly, but for now I have you, and that's enough. That night, Emma lay awake in the guest room, the memory of Alexander's touch lingering on her skin. She didn't know how much longer she could keep her heart locked away. He was breaking through her barriers piece by piece, and she wasn't sure if she could stop him, or if she even wanted to. Across the hall, Alexander sat in his own room, staring out at the moonlit ocean. He had spent years controlling every aspect of his life, ensuring that no one could hurt him, but Emma had slipped past his defenses in a way he hadn't expected, and it terrified him. For the first time in his life, Alexander Carter felt vulnerable. The next morning, Emma woke early, drawn to the sound of the waves. She walked barefoot along the beach, the cool sand beneath her feet grounding her in the present. She needed time to think, to sort through the mess of emotions Alexander had stirred in her. She didn't hear him approach until he was standing beside her, his hands in his pockets. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Emma shook her head. Too much on my mind. Alexander nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Same here. They stood in silence, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the water. Then, without thinking, Emma spoke. Do you ever wish things were different? She asked. All the time, Alexander replied, his voice tinged with regret. But I've learned that wishing doesn't change anything. You have to act. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the honesty in his words. What would you change if you could? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. I'd start over. I'd do things differently, but most of all, I'd let myself feel sooner. Emma's heart ached at his words. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. It's not too late, Alexander. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe not, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about you too. Emma felt the weight of his words settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through this together. The sun rose high over the Hamptons estate, casting golden light across the ocean and filling the house with warmth. Emma felt the beauty of the setting, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. After her conversation with Alexander on the beach, she couldn't shake the weight of his words or the undeniable shift in their relationship. The day passed quietly. Alexander spent the morning on calls in his study, his sharp voice cutting through the otherwise tranquil air of the house. Emma avoided him, retreating to the greenhouse to clear her head among the lush plants. She found some peace, her hands brushing over petals as she thought about everything they'd been through. She was deep in thought when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her father, short and simple. I hope you're doing okay. We miss you. Tears pricked at Emma's eye. She missed him too, missed her life before all of this. But as much as she wanted to believe she could go back to the way things were, a part of her knew it wasn't possible. She had changed, and so had her heart. By evening, Alexander emerged from his study, his expression tired but determined. He found Emma on the balcony, watching the waves roll in as the sky turned shades of orange and pink. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice softer than usual. Emma glanced at him, surprised. Of course. He stepped out onto the balcony, leaning against the railing beside her. For a moment they stood in silence, the sound of the ocean filling the space between them. You've been quiet today, Alexander said finally. Emma shrugged, just thinking about what. She hesitated, unsure if she should share the truth, but something about the way he looked at her, patient, almost hopeful, made her want to open up. About my dad, my family, everything I left behind. Alexander nodded, his gaze distant. I know it hasn't been easy for you. Emma laughed bitterly. Easy? This whole arrangement turned my life upside down. I didn't mean to complicate things for you, he said, his tone sincere. I thought I could keep this simple, keep us separate. But I was wrong. Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. What are you saying, Alexander? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm saying that somewhere along the way this stopped being just a deal for me. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. Her breath caught at his words, and she turned away, staring out at the ocean. I don't know if I can trust this, Alexander. Trust you? I don't blame you, he said, his voice steady but I'm not going to pretend anymore. You deserve better than that. Emma closed her eyes, her emotions swirling. She wanted to believe him, to let herself hope, but fear held her back. What happens when this is over, when the arrangement ends? Alexander's hand brushed hers, tentative but firm. That's up to you, Emma. I'm not going anywhere. The next day, they returned to the city, the serenity of the Hamptons giving way to the bustling chaos of Manhattan. Emma felt the weight of reality settle over her as they arrived back at the Carter mansion, the looming threats and unresolved emotions pressing down on her. Victoria had been quiet in recent days, but Emma knew it was only a matter of time before she made another move. The thought kept her on edge, her mind racing with possibilities. That evening, Alexander called her to his study. When she entered, she found him seated at his desk, a glass of whiskey in hand. His expression was serious, his usual confidence laced with something soft. For Emma, he began, motioning for her to sit across from him. There's something I need to tell you. She frowned, her heart skipping a beat. What is it? He took a deep breath, setting the glass down. Victoria, threats aren't just about exposing in our arrangement. She's leveraging information against me, things that could hurt not just my reputation, but the company as well. Emma's chest tightened. What kind of information? Alexander hesitated, his jaw tightening. Years ago, before I took over the company, my father made deals that weren't above board. Victoria's father was involved, and she has documents that could tie me to it. Emma stared at him, her mind racing. But you didn't have anything to do with it. No, Alexander said firmly. But it won't matter. The media won't care about the truth. They'll twist the story into whatever sells. Emma's stomach churned at the weight of his words. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'll figure it out. I always do. Emma reached across the desk, her hand covering his. You don't have to do this alone, Alexander. Let me help. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Why would you do that after everything I've put you through? Because I care about you, Emma said simply, her voice steady. And because I know you'd do the same for me. Alexander's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of her support. As the night wore on, Emma sat alone in her room, staring out at the city lights. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Victoria's threats loomed large, and her feelings for Alexander were more complicated than ever. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that together they could face whatever came their way. Across the hall, Alexander sits window, the weight of his confession still heavy on his shoulders, but Emma's words echoed in his mind, a beacon of light in the darkness. You don't have to do this alone. He had spent his life believing vulnerability was a weakness, that letting people in would only lead to pain. But Emma was proving him wrong, and for the first time he felt like he didn't have to carry the burden alone. The following days were filled with mounting tension. The weight of Victoria's threats hung over the Carter mansion like a storm cloud, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Despite Alexander's composed exterior, she could see the strain in his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed heavier with each passing moment. One evening, Emma found herself pacing the sitting room, her mind racing. The mansion felt too quiet, the air charged with unspoken fears. She paused by the large window, staring out at the city lights, and wondered how her life had come to this. The lines between the arrangement and reality had blurred to the point where she no longer knew what was real except for the growing feelings she had for Alexander. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Alexander's voice behind her. You're going to wear a hole in the floor. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his expression weary. I can't sit still, she admitted. It feels like we're waiting for something terrible to happen. Alexander stepped into the room, his presence commanding yet comforting. We're not waiting, we're preparing. Emma crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. And how exactly are we preparing, Alexander? Because from where I'm standing it feels like we're just hoping Victoria decides to back off. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know it seems that way, but I have a plan. Care to share it with me? Emma asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Alexander hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor before meeting hers again. I'm going to confront her. Emma's heart sank. What, Alexander? That's exactly what she wants. Maybe, he said, his voice steady. But I can't let her hold this over me or over us any longer. If I don't face her now, she'll keep coming after us. Emma stared at him, fear tightening her chest. And what if she doesn't back down? What if she exposes everything? I'll handle it, Alexander said firmly, stepping closer. You don't need to worry about her. Emma shook her head, tears pricking at her eyes. You can't just protect me from everything, Alexander. I'm in this too. I know, he said softly, his hand brushing her cheek. And that's why I need to end this for both of us." The next morning Alexander left early, his expression grim as he kissed Emma's forehead. Before walking out the door, she stood by the window watching his car disappear down the driveway. Her heart pounding with anxiety, she hated the idea of him facing Victoria alone. But she knew there was no stopping him. Hours passed, each one dragging slower than the last. Emma tried to distract herself with small tasks around the mansion, but her mind kept drifting back to Alexander. What was happening? Was he safe? Would Victoria finally make good on her threats? As the afternoon turned into evening, Emma's phone buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. "Come to the office. I need you." Her heart leapt into her throat as she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. The drive to Carter Enterprises felt like an eternity, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When she arrived, she was ushered up to Alexander's private office by a nervous assistant. Emma stepped inside to find Alexander standing by the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, and the usually pristine office was in slight disarray. A stack of papers knocked over his desk, cluttered with folders. "What happened?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Alexander turned to face her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "It's over." Emma's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Victoria's leverage is gone," he said, his voice steady but low. "I called her bluff. She tried to threaten me, but I had my team dig deeper into her father's dealings. Turns out she's more implicated in his mess than I am." Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. "So she backed down?" Alexander nodded. "She had no choice. If she exposed me, she'd expose herself too." The deal's off. Relief washed over Emma, and she crossed the room to stand in front of him. "You did it." "We did it," he corrected, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I couldn't have done this without you." Emma felt her cheeks flush, her heart swelling with emotion she could no longer suppress. "I was so scared, Alexander." "I thought." He cut her off, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I know, and I'm sorry I made you worry." For a moment they stood there holding each other in the quiet of the office. The weight of the past week seemed to lift, leaving only the steady rhythm of their hearts. Later that night, back at the mansion, Emma sat with Alexander in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. The warmth of the room wrapped around them like a blanket, and for the first time in weeks Emma felt at peace. "You never told me how you found out about Victoria's leverage," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Alexander smirked, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Let's just say I have a very good team, and a little help from an unexpected ally." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Her brother Alexander admitted. "He'd been tired of her schemes for years. When he found out what she was doing, he came to me." Emma couldn't hide her surprise. "That's unexpected." Alexander shrugged. "Family dynamics are complicated, but I'm not going to question a lucky break." Emma smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad it's over." "Me too," he said, his voice soft. "But there's one thing I still need to say." Emma looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" "I love you," Alexander said, his blue eyes steady and unflinching. "This started as a business deal, but it's become so much more. You've changed me, Emma, and I don't want this to end." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she took in his words. She had been so afraid to let herself believe in the possibility of them, but now she couldn't deny what she felt. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Alexander smiled, pulling her into a tender kiss. For the first time, there were no barriers between them, no contracts, no cages, just the undeniable truth of their hearts. The morning after Alexander's heartfelt confession, the Carter mansion felt different. The heavy tension that had once permeated its walls was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet hope. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like an outsider in this house. It felt like something closer to home. Emma stepped into the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered. To her surprise, Alexander was there, casually leaning against the counter with a cup in hand. His usually pristine suit was replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, and the sight of him so relaxed made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "Good morning," Emma replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "This is new." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What, you in the kitchen looking like a normal person?" she teased. He chuckled, the sound rich and genuine. "Don't get us to it. I might ruin my image." Emma rolled her eyes, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Too late. I've already seen the real you." Alexander's expression softened, and he stepped closer. "And you're still here?" Emma's smile faltered as emotion welled up in her chest. "I'm still here," she said softly, meeting his gaze. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Alexander reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." They drove out of the city that afternoon, the car winding through quiet countryside roads. Emma glanced at Alexander, curiosity bubbling inside her. "Where are we going? You'll see," he said, his lips curving into a small secretive smile. When they finally arrived, Emma's breath caught. They pulled up to a charming farmhouse surrounded by sprawling fields of wild flowers. The house was simple, but beautiful, with a wraparound porch and a large oak tree in the front yard. "What is this place?" Emma asked, stepping out of the car. "It belonged to my mother," Alexander said, his voice tinged with emotion. "She bought it as a retreat from the city. I haven't been here in years." Emma looked at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Why now?" "Because it's time to start over," he said, turning to face her. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, building walls, and shutting people out. But you've shown me there's more to life than that. And I want this to be the place where we figure out what that more is together." Emma stared at him, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. "Alexander, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said, taking her hands in his. "Just tell me you'll stay, not because of an arrangement or a deal, but because you want to." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, and she nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "Of course, I'll stay. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes." Alexander announced his temporary leave from Carter Enterprises, shocking the business world. The media speculated endlessly, but Alexander refused to comment, focusing instead on his new life with Emma. They spent their days at the farmhouse, working side by side to restore it to its former glory. Emma discovered a joy she hadn't felt in years, her days filled with laughter, hard work, and moments of quiet intimacy with Alexander. T in turn seemed lighter, the weight of his past replaced by a newfound sense of peace. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun below the horizon, Alexander turned to Emma, his expression serious. "There's one more thing I need to do." Emma frowned, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring. "I know this started as a lie," Alexander said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "but everything I feel for you is real. I don't want this to end, Emma. I want to spend the rest of my life proving how much you mean to me. Will you marry me properly this time?" Tears streamed down Emma's face as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course." "Yes." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then he pulled her into a kiss, the promise of a future together sealing the moment. The weeks turned into months, and Emma and Alexander built a life together filled with love, laughter, and purpose. Their farmhouse became a sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves without the weight of the outside world. Emma often thought back to how their journey had begun, how unlikely it all was, how impossible it had seemed at first. But as she watched Alexander chasing their golden retriever Max across the yard one sunny afternoon, she realized that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Years later, Emma stood in the garden of their farmhouse, watching as Alexander chased their toddler daughter around the yard. Her laughter echoed across the fields, a sound that made Emma's heart swell with gratitude. Alexander caught their daughter, swinging her into his arms and spinning her around. He looked up at Emma, his smile radiant, and she couldn't help but smile back. Life wasn't perfect, it never was, but it was theirs, and that was more than enough. We loved having you here. Share in the comments what you thought of the story and how we can make it even better next time.